Hello guys, welcome back. I hope everyone is doing great. So in tonight's video, I thought I would focus my attention on a house that I'm really a big fan of, that I haven't really talked much about on this channel, and that's Chanel. So I own about 5 or 6 from the House of Chanel, the Les Exclusifs line of fragrances specifically. And I really do enjoy them. They're some of my favorite fragrances. And I always feel like I'm out there exploring all of these other interesting niche brands. But at the end of the day, when I was thinking about a fragrance that would be my signature scent, I kind of found myself looking at a few specific fragrance houses, designer fragrance houses, and Chanel is one of them. Guerlain, I really am loving some of their fragrances from the L'Art de la Matière line. I know they're really expensive, but I can't help to love some of them, which are simple, but really very refined and really well done, easy to wear, and some might say mass appealing. Another designer line that I really like is the Hermès, the Hermescence line. I have only a few of those. I haven't really delved in. I have Cuir d'Ange and I have the violet one as well, along with a travel size of ambery, which is a really nice one. And in terms of the Chanel fragrances, I have a nice variety. I have La Pausa, which is a nice fresh iris fragrance. I have Le Lion, which is a more recent release from the house, and that's an amber fragrance that I'm really enjoying. I also have 31 Rue Cambon, which is a nice chypre fragrance. And of course, I have a bottle of Cuir de Russie, which I really enjoy. And then I have a bottle of what I want to talk about tonight, and that's Coromandel. So Coromandel, I would say, is the fragrance that got me liking patchouli. And when I was thinking recently about what fragrance in my collection would make a great signature scent, and it's really hard for me to have a signature scent that I'm wearing repeatedly because I'm always testing fragrances. So sometimes it's hard to even wear things that I enjoy, let alone repeatedly wearing something that I consider a signature scent for myself. It was easier back in the day when I owned much less fragrances, but with the start of the channel, it's become even more difficult. And I found myself gravitating towards the Guerlains, and I found myself gravitating towards the Chanel and also the Dior Privé line. I have a few of those fragrances. I have the discontinued Fève Délicieuse, I have Cuir Canage, and I have a few decants, and I recently ordered some samples that I want to talk about as well. And even though I do like the Dior Privé line, and I love the Guerlain fragrances that I have in my collection and some of the samples that I've been testing, I would say that Chanel, the House of Chanel, the Les Exclusifs line of fragrances, is where I would go for a signature scent for myself. A signature scent for me represents something easy to wear, easy to reach for, refined, well-made. And I feel like even though Coromandel is nothing super interesting, daring, and super niche, I guess it is designer after all, I really enjoy wearing this fragrance. I think Chanel has a certain vibe, a certain aesthetic. To me, it gives me the feeling of a simple elegance. I think that's what the brand stands for. It's a woman in pearls, in black. It's Audrey Hepburn. That's what is coming to mind when I think of Chanel, I guess in general. And the Chanel fragrances in their Les Exclusifs line have a certain simplicity, and I'm not loving all of them. And some of them struggle with performance and they're a little light wearing. And even though I see the fragrances overall as simple, and Coromandel being sort of a simple fragrance, I actually, in my opinion, find this to be a very layered, well-made fragrance. And the more I wore it and the more I sort of analyzed what it smells like to me, from the opening to the mid to the dry down, the more I thought that it's actually an interesting fragrance that has layers. And I think it wears almost three-dimensional. And I was even comparing it to this little decant of Patchouli Paris from Guerlain, because Guerlain's Patchouli Paris is sort of a musky, little bit of a light take on patchouli, even though I've seen reviews that sort of talk about this as a bold patchouli and maybe almost a little surprising for the L'Art de la Matière line of Guerlain's. I personally think that it's a light take on patchouli that contrasts with some floral notes, and I think the earthy patchouli in Patchouli Paris dissipates pretty quickly to my nose, in my opinion. I feel like Coromandel is along the lines of Patchouli Paris, where it's taking a patchouli, but it's not going to give you a dirty, sort of grungy patchouli that brings you back to the 70s. Chanel's Coromandel, in my opinion, takes the patchouli and it gives you sort of a classy take and a wearable, enjoyable patchouli. So like I said, this is the fragrance that sort of got me interested in patchouli fragrances to begin with. And Coromandel was originally released in 2007 as an EDT. And then in 2016, it was repackaged, I believe, into these bottles here. And it was released along with a bunch of other fragrances as EDPs. They all became Eau de Parfum concentration in Chanel's Les Exclusifs line of fragrances. And this one is the 75 ml, the 2.5 fluid ounce. And I so regret not getting the bigger size of this. I think it comes in a 100 ml and a 200 ml as well. And the nose behind this is Jacques Polge. And the fragrance, like I said, to my nose comes off like a nice layered fragrance that's almost three-dimensional, that does something really, really nice with the patchouli. It's not a harsh patchouli. Some people are turned off by patchouli in fragrances or the idea of wearing a patchouli-centered perfume. But for those of you who may not have tried this, I know that it's a pretty popular fragrance at this point, but for anyone that's afraid of the idea of patchouli, I would say that Coromandel does the patchouli beautifully with some freshness and some iris. And of course, there's that typical Chanel DNA that you can't quite put your finger on, and it's aldehydic and a little musky. And you have something ambery about this, and there's a sweetness. And what a lot of reviewers also talk about is that there is a white chocolate note in here. I personally don't get the white chocolate. I'm not someone who likes to eat white chocolate. To me, it's just a high concentration of sugar, I guess. So I'm not sure what white chocolate would even smell like, but every time I smell this fragrance, I do detect a sweetness that's sort of swirling around together with some of the other notes in here. But I can't say that I smell this and think I smell patchouli and specifically white chocolate. I am not picking up a white chocolate note in here, but we're gonna spray this. I did wear this as my scent of the day. I was enjoying it at work, but I'm going to spray it again so we can talk about what it smells like. It opens so fresh and aldehydic, very, very typical Chanel. It's a very fresh opening. At the top, there is bitter orange, there's neroli and citrus. And within minutes, I'm getting this beautiful patchouli that's a little earthy, and that muskiness, the aldehydic nature of the Chanel fragrances is absolutely stunning in my opinion. And I love how I experience this fragrance. I experience it in almost a three-dimensional sort of way. So while I'm experiencing this freshness from the citrus notes, I'm getting the patchouli that comes through, the earthiness, and then at the same time, there's something a little bit floral as well. And in my mind, for some reason with this one, I feel like I can see the notes in layers, and they're one behind each other, and I can sort of experience bits and pieces of these beautiful notes that are coming at me. The citrus, a little bit of floral, the patchouli, the muskiness, There's something a little powdery and delicate about it, but at the same time, while it's delicate, I feel like I can almost get a photorealistic flavor of this patchouli. It's a photorealistic feeling that I'm almost smelling the part of patchouli that, to my nose, I perceive in many of the fragrances out there that focus on patchouli, that earthy, almost dirt. Like if you do gardening, I even said this in my review of Psychedelique by Javoy. It's almost like smelling the dirt that's a little damp. Like if you ever do gardening and you pull out fresh herbs from dirt that was wet because it rained, and the dirt is a little musty and it's obviously earthy. That sort of smell, that component that comes along with patchouli, I get these little pieces of it in this fragrance. It's so photorealistic, but these pieces of patchouli, this earthiness, is almost dispersed in this three-dimensional fragrance that has the beautiful aldehydic, musky component to it. And there's a freshness that definitely is a counterpart to the patchouli. There's the iris with a little bit of powderiness, a little bit of floral, just a little bit that's a counterpart to the patchouli as well. And the citrus hangs around for a little bit. I still get that freshness from the citrus. There is definitely a sweetness to the fragrance, nothing sugary, nothing too sweet in my opinion. I think it sort of swirls around together with these other notes. You get the wafts of the sweetness that's often used to complement patchouli, like Psychedelique has a good dose of vanilla, I think, a good dose of sweetness that is a counterpart to the patchouli, while a fragrance like Patchouli by Parfumum Rama might be a little less sweet from memory, from testing that fragrance. I feel like it's a little bolder in terms of that patchouli. It might be a little less sweet than Psychedelique. This one I don't perceive as being too sweet. And like I said, nothing in here comes off like a chocolate note, nor do I get a chocolatey patchouli. I feel like it's more the earthy parts of the patchouli that I'm getting, and the sweetness is not like a chocolate cake sweetness that sometimes comes along with the patchouli. I'm not getting that in this fragrance. I do pick up on the floral components. There's jasmine and there's rose, and they definitely play their part together with that iris, like I said, that makes this a little bit powdery. But while it's powdery, you have the muskiness that sort of subsides as the fragrance dries down. That typical Chanel aldehydic opening is so unique. I feel like you know when you smell a Chanel for the most part. I think for the most part, it's taking the patchouli in a delicate direction. It's taking the patchouli in a direction that's sort of very easy to wear. It's taking the patchouli basically and it's contrasting it with all of these other delicate notes. But while I use the word delicate, Coromandel is 100% unisex. I think a lot of men enjoy wearing this fragrance. I think a lot of people love this fragrance. And as the fragrance dries down, it's met with some woody notes as well, and it does get a little ambery. And as that citrus freshness sort of dies off and the fragrance is in the full dry down, it always remains a patchouli-centered fragrance. It's just a little bit ambery, and I feel like the woody notes are sort of a little bit more apparent. And the fragrance as a whole, I feel wears really, really nice. I think that I would describe it as having some nice projection and sillage in the first 3 to 4 hours. Then it sort of becomes closer to the skin and it lasts on my skin for a nice 8 hours. I can smell it on myself for the entire day. It's not a loud fragrance. It's not what some would call a beast mode fragrance. I feel like Le Lion might be a stronger, more long-lasting fragrance. Coromandel is a little bit lighter wearing, but nonetheless, it's a long-lasting fragrance. I have some in this collection, like La Pausa. It definitely doesn't last as long as Coromandel. I just purchased the new one, Comet. It's a beautiful fragrance. I love it. But the lasting power, I think it struggles a little bit with performance. I'm totally satisfied with Coromandel. It doesn't last on my skin as long as Le Lion, but it does last a nice 8 hours. I can enjoy it. And I sprayed about 4 or 5 sprays this morning, and I definitely smelled it on myself the entire day. It's really pretty, and when I really get my nose to it and I inhale the fragrance, I get every bit of that earthiness in the patchouli, and it's, like I said earlier, it's almost photorealistic in this fragrance. I feel like I'm smelling pieces of dirt, which sounds terrible, but it's the great part of the patchouli. It's the earthiness of the patchouli. What I love about Coromandel is the way it's contrasted. It's contrasted in such a way that you can enjoy the patchouli without being overwhelmed, and you're wearing a classy fragrance that's a little fresh, a little powdery, it's a little sweet. I think the fragrance has depth, pretty much. The 3-dimensional description of the fragrance, that basically is a different way of saying that to my nose, I think the fragrance has a depth to it. Even though it's not taking you on some huge journey, it does evolve. It absolutely changes from the way it opens, with the citrus freshness and the patchouli muskiness with the floral touches that come in after a few minutes. It gets a little powdery, and then you have these swirls of sweetness that run through the fragrance. And as it dries down and you lose the freshness and the aldehydes give way to the ambery components of the fragrance, I pick up on those ambery components. There's an amber accord or an amber note, and there's benzoin in here. So there's a warmth that comes with it. And I really do like the way the fragrance wears all the way to the dry down. And as it's drying down now, actually, it's less aldehydic, and I'm getting some of those ambery components that sort of give the fragrance not only depth, but a density to it. So it's not just a musky take on patchouli. It has a denseness to it, and I think it smells fantastic. I really do enjoy this. And even though I don't technically have a signature scent, because like I said, I'm always wearing something different, I did think about what a signature scent would be, a signature scent in my collection, which one it would be. And I think, even though I love so many of my fragrances, I think this one would be it, Chanel's Coromandel. So I do have here the sample of Patchouli Paris. And I remember when I was talking about this, saying that it's basically a musky take on patchouli that also has some florals. And so I took this out and I compared, and I also said that I liked this fragrance, and I do like it. And I did do a side-by-side comparison just to see what the differences would be. And right from the opening, they are different. The patchouli in Chanel's Coromandel opens with the freshness from the bitter orange, and there's the neroli and the citrus, while the opening of Patchouli Paris is this patchouli that's immediately contrasted with floral notes. So while Coromandel has this fresher opening, Patchouli Paris is opening with more of a patchouli that's met with some florals and a little bit of muskiness. But the one thing that I'll say, it's interesting how when you smell something on its own and then you smell it side by side in comparison to another fragrance, how you really pick up the nuances and the differences. And not that Patchouli Paris was released by Guerlain to be the counterpart to Chanel's Coromandel. I'm in no way suggesting that. I thought of Patchouli Paris when I was preparing for this video because I remember thinking that Patchouli Paris was a musky, light take on patchouli, and it just sort of made me spray side by side just out of curiosity. But I will say that even though Coromandel is starting to dry down, it's definitely a fresher sort of fragrance. It comes off fresher than Patchouli Paris, and it also comes off as a fragrance that has more depth and more layers, while Patchouli Paris is a little flatter and a little more linear to my nose. It does a nice job with the patchouli, but Coromandel has a lot of layers. When you get your nose, every time that I bring my nose to my arm to smell Coromandel, I smell layers of notes. And I think that's why I love the fragrance. It's really nice. So that's my take on Chanel's Coromandel. I'm a big fan of the fragrances in this line by Chanel, and I will get to reviewing each and every one. I also have some samples, and I'd like to order some other samples like Bois de Zile and Sycamore, and there are some others like Boy that I never got my nose on. And some are discontinued that are fantastic fragrances that a lot of YouTubers talk about. So the House of Chanel is definitely one that I love. And I would love to know what you guys think of Coromandel and some of the other fragrances in the Les Exclusifs line of this house. And as usual, thank you so much for watching, your support, and your comments. Until next time, bye guys.